All right, well, hello, welcome back to episode 2 of the Accent Consulting Show. I'm your host, Nick Rambo. I'm joined today by Jessica D'Esposito. Jessica, welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah,
I've never been on a podcast before, so it should be exciting.
Well, we're sort of a new podcast as well. This is our second one.
Mm-hmm.
The first one was with Phil Wright, our owner.
How was that?
Well, I mean, it was interesting. We talked about different things like the likelihood, and I think like the actual likelihood that we'll basically be the next Mr. Beast on this thing.
Mm-hmm.
I told Phil kind of the financial implications of that, like the money he'd have to front to sort of get that level of acclaim. And I think his interest sort of waned at that point, but you know, all in good time, right?
Yeah, it was a good podcast. I will say, I know that it was probably like pulling teeth getting him to do it. So props to you for even getting him on here.
The thing about tech people, you know, a lot of times the stereotypes are true. We have some, you know, that are you know, willing and able to be in front of a camera or, you know, behind a microphone and enjoy the experience, but it can be difficult. But Phil did great, honestly. I was really impressed, and I told him that after. I don't think it was a comfortable space for him, but he definitely rose to the occasion, and I think did a good job.
Yeah,
for sure. Well, Jessica, you have been with Accent for how long?
Coming up on 4 years now.
4 years, and the nature of your role is?
So I am partner development. It's a fancy way to say sales, but I really help people evaluate what they need in their organization and then make the right recommendations for them.
Sure. The topic for today's conversation is going to be about what to expect when you're expecting a new IT partner, right? And we could have really leaned hard into this and gone after a lot of like pregnancy kind of
punny
puns.
Type of stuff.
We're going to avoid that mostly,
Thank you.
I think.
I appreciate that.
But I think the reality is that most companies don't really wake up one day and then just decide to switch IT providers, right? Usually, I mean, there could be like a cataclysmic event, like something happens and their system, their mainframe is melting down or like whatever happens. I'm decidedly non-technical, so apologies for that. But like something could happen, you know, there could be like a cybersecurity incident or something like that, and it's like, oh no, we need help. But I think for a lot of others, it's just that eventual buildup of frustration over time, right? Tickets drag, communication is lacking. You know, maybe communication feels vague or costs keep rising and they don't know why. And so, you know, at some point, leadership then, you know, it starts thinking about IT and the nature of the role that IT plays in their business and you know, maybe expects better. Maybe the frustration is added up and enough is enough, right? And so that's what we're going to kind of focus on today. So my first question for you, when companies first arrive, right, and that conversation begins, where are they usually at emotionally?
Yeah. Well, it definitely depends on where they're coming from. So if they are coming from already having another MSP and they've started looking, they usually are frustrated, like you mentioned. Usually there's pent up things. There's that frustration. There's constant problems, whatever they may be, and that's always a gambit of things. But they usually are frustrated if they're coming from another provider. If they don't have a provider, it may be the case of they're growing and they're realizing we need somebody to take this over, or if, like you said, it may be something cataclysmic if they don't have a provider, and then they're like, oh crap, we really need to deal with this right now. But I would say most of the time when they're coming from another MSP, it is with frustration.
Yeah. And just for those of you watching and listening, MSP is a managed service provider, right? Industry speak. Sorry, I want to make sure we're like friendly here. So that's what we do, right? Accent Consulting is an MSP or managed service provider in the IT space. So that's sort of the framework that we're bringing to this. I guess my second question for you is, you know, at that point when there's frustration or, you know, if they don't have internal IT, they've realized now it's time to go. And I think a lot of times that happens because it's just like it's compiling, right? It just IT gets pushed to whoever's available, and you know, it's at a certain point, it's enough is enough, and it's time to start looking. Do you think that businesses tend to wait too long before questioning the nature of their? It could be a relationship, right, with another provider, or relationship with their own internal resources. Do you think businesses wait too long?
I don't think that they wait too long to question it. I think they are waiting too long to act. The longer they're waiting, the more frustration that's building up, the more tech debt they're incurring, which, tech debt is you.
You did. I was going to ask you.
You're going to ask me.
Yeah.
I was like, I better define that since I didn't define MSP. Tech debt is really where something needs updated, but you put it off. And the longer you put it off, the more expensive it becomes. Inflation.
Yeah.
Happens here too.
Sure.
Right. But
maybe I'm just going to go with you because Jessica and I were just recently on site at a potential provider, and they had something that they referred to as was it a tech graveyard?
They called it their
tech
cemetery.
Yeah, right.
Cemetery.
Just like a pile of monitors and machines that nobody quite knew what to do with, but they weren't working, and so it was just sort of this thing. And that was an indicator to us, like, oh, okay, well maybe there's some other issues here, right? Yeah. And so but tech debt I think is a really interesting idea.
Interesting. Sure.
Well, I mean, as someone who came, from outside of the IT space, it was a new concept for me. And so something that you don't necessarily think about, I'm not an entrepreneur, I'm not a business owner, but for people that are hopefully listening to this who are, those could be some subtle indicators of maybe a more significant situation.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So going on to our next point here, when businesses start wondering, is our MSP the problem? A few questions here. What typically triggers that search in your experience?
Sometimes there is a major event that has happened. The provider may have dropped the ball completely on something that disrupted the business and has caused downtime or loss of revenue. That's not as often the case, but we definitely see those. A lot of times it's just little death by 1,000 paper cuts. It's little things constantly. They're not maybe getting to tickets as often or as quickly as they should. What I hear a lot is the people coming to us don't feel like their provider is really giving them any kind of strategic guidance on anything.
So it's like that quick fix universe, right?
Yeah.
Or something breaks and you call in and say, hey, my printer's not printing, my computer isn't computing, my password isn't passwording, like whatever, right? It's those little things and it's just like, hey, I need somebody to fix this.
Yeah.
But I think a good MSP, a good IT provider should, in theory, be giving you a roadmap, should be giving you a strategic plan that's going to allow your IT infrastructure to support your business goals, at a minimum.
Yeah.
But then going further than that, should really be enabling your success, right? I've talked about this before with you, I know, but like coming into this world of IT, my take on it is that a lot of companies think about IT the way that they think about their light bill or the electricity or the water, or it's just a utility, right? And there's danger in that because, ultimately, if you're just like turning on the sink and expecting it to work, and then when it doesn't, there's a problem, there's so much more that you can do. And we can talk about AI, we can talk about, just the day-to-day elements of managing users and resetting passwords and all that, but that's a drain on valuable resources in the business world.
I feel like we have a lot of plumbing puns we could work in here.
Well, I don't know how can we get that back to pregnancy at all? Do you think?
Plumbing and pregnancy, I don't know.
Yeah.
If you think about it, kind of like plumbing, though, you turn it on, you expect it to work. If you turn it on and it doesn't work, sure, you could maybe put some plumber's putty on your pipes.
Sure.
But that's just a quick fix.
Right.
It's a short-term thing when maybe your pipes are rusty and you need to completely replace them.
And that's the idea of a good MSP kind of coming in, doing that evaluation and saying, okay, well, there are other issues here we need to address. And that's going to ultimately, there's a cost attached to that. We're not going to ignore that fact. But the big idea is that, a good MSP should be walking you through that process because IT can enable success. So it sounds like, it could be an event. It could be a buildup of frustration. Just for context, what is it usually, right? Is it that buildup or is it that sort of oh no, everything's broken?
Yeah, it's usually the buildup. If you're with somebody and oh no, everything's broken, then you're on them to hurry up and fix it.
Sure.
It's not, okay, everything's broken, let me go now search for a new managed service provider.
Sure.
So it's usually the little paper cuts that people come to us with.
So we've talked about some of those rising costs and maybe lack of communication, things like that. But what are some other signs that maybe your MSP is holding you back, right? Where, and we've heard from clients, like as we've grown, we don't feel like our MSP is able to keep up with us. As our MSP has grown, we don't feel like we're as important.
Yeah.
So what are some of those common signs, red flags, early warning signs that the MSP relationship might need a reboot?
Yeah, I think one of the main things that you should look out for is the recurring issues. If there's something that you've brought to their attention, or it's a problem that just keeps happening and they're not really giving you a great solution, maybe they're fixing it, but there's no solution to the core problem and they can't tell you why, I would say that's a major red flag.
Yeah.
They should really be trying to dig down and figure out core issues and be strategic about those versus just slapping a Band-Aid on stuff.
Yeah. Now, I mean, we've all had bad relationships, right? Do you want to talk about your worst No.
That would probably take up your whole podcast, so we'll pass there.
My point there, though, is that like sometimes relationships go bad, but in your experience, why do businesses tend to stick it out, right? They can see warning signs, they can, see the escalating frustrations, but change is hard, right? So what are some of those reasons why people would just hold fast and not think about a change?
I think that change is scary.
Right.
It is for everybody.
Fear, right?
You do have a relationship with your provider most likely, and you feel like you want to give them another chance or give them a third or fourth chance. And so you want them to do well, and you also don't want to go through the headache of changing providers. Not that it's a horrible experience all the time, but it takes some time, it takes some effort to do your research, talk with people.
Sure.
And it's like you said, it's kind of a utility a lot of times versus something that you want to spend your time focusing on. So I think that's why people are hesitant to change.
Well, I mean, there's that fear element, right? Where it's uncertainty, are there going to be disruptions?
Yeah.
But I think you also talked about like sort of normalizing that frustration, right? And look, we've been in business for 23 years. We've made mistakes, right? I can't sit here and be like, hey, like every time, we've, without fail. And so at a certain point, you have to, understand that there may be issues or setbacks. But I think a lot of it too is in the way that your provider handles those, right? And so, some of that normalized frustration could be normalizing excuses, right? Like, oh, well, hey, sorry, we were low staff, or there was another crisis, or whatever else. And so I think some of it, you can normalize the issues themselves, but also the response. So I think, if you're feeling this way, as a business owner, as a business leader, and, there are issues and, you're on that third or fourth or fifth or 14th chance, I think a lot of it comes down as well to how is your provider responding to that, right? Because you're not always going to get it perfect, right? Technology is technology at the end of the day. And I think that you have to, have some sort of willingness to understand, there are going to be issues and challenges along the way. But I don't know. I think it's just important to focus on the idea that at some point there will be issues, and then, what's the response? Yeah.
Somebody I recently talked to is saying how their provider kind of played the blame game with them. And if that's the case, that's never okay. Pointing fingers, saying that it was their fault versus the MSP's fault. So
as you've worked with, prospective clients, what's usually that final straw?
Could be a lot of things, like I said, the main issue is a lot of little issues. There's not usually one thing. Okay. So it really depends. But typically it's all in the customer service and how you feel the relationship is going.
Sure. How do you know if you're just not being too picky?
I would say it's your business, so be picky. I mean, IT is kind of a major component of most businesses. So be picky about it. If something is not working the way you want it to work, then let your provider know. And if they can't do anything about it, or if they're unwilling to do something about it, time to start looking.
Because I mean, there's inconvenience, but then there's dysfunction. And there is a difference. And so I was wondering, you said there are a lot of different reasons why people will, pull that trigger to think, okay, we got to change. But I think a lot of it as well just comes down to trust. And that's something that I think is imperative in any type of relationship, right? But you have to trust that, your IT partner is as interested in your success as you are. And that's going to, require a different level of investment and different level of commitment, because there are a lot of shops out there who are in that break fix category who, okay, your printer's not printing, your computer's not computing, we'll come in and we'll figure that out. But I think, in our universe here at Accent, we're investing, right? We're sitting down, meeting regularly, understanding how technology can be a profit driver, which is, I think, a connection some people haven't made. Right? It's like, okay, we're in the cloud, we're on devices, we understand that the core functionality of our business requires technology. So shouldn't your technology partner be sitting down at a table and going, how can we do this better?
Absolutely.
It seems foundational to me, but I think a lot of people maybe aren't thinking about it in that regard, right? Okay, well, let's switch over to, the search. Right? Let's say that, things have piled up and you've, reached that breaking point and you're like, okay, now it's time for something different. What should companies evaluate? Right? And the simplest answer is price, but price is tricky.
I would say that's the simplest answer and the least informed answer.
Okay. Walk us through it.
Sure, somebody could sit down and match apples to apples what you currently have. But what you should really do is have other providers come in and evaluate your setup and watch them. See how thorough of a job they do. And if they, want to just throw a price out there and not actually look at anything or ask you some business questions about what you want, how you want IT to function.
Or how you're using it, right?
And how you're using it currently. And they're not going through that process with you, then they're not invested in your success. So price is an easy one that most people do look at because they aren't looking at the other factors.
Right. I think price is simple, but we also have to understand there are different factors. IT is an unregulated industry. And so, we could talk about this in terms of finding out what a good fit is, but that plays a factor because basically anybody can pop up a website and, get a logo off of AI or whatever. Be like, hey, guess what? I'm an IT professional. And maybe they'll look the part, but what in your experience separates, a really good MSP from one that maybe just looks polished? And ideally you'll have both, but again, you can, AI exists and all these different tools. We can just go and it looks legitimate, but what are the things that will really help you understand if they're a good fit for you beyond just coming in and understanding how you work and, what your goals are? What are some other things?
Yeah. Well, ask them questions. Look at what accreditations and awards they've won. You want to evaluate how long they've been in business, kind of their size. Ask them some questions about how they operate. Do they outsource help desk? Is it all in-house? How many people are on their team? All those questions are good questions for evaluating a provider. And if they kind of skirt around the answer or don't really want to say, then, that's a red flag too.
Sure.
So.
But you talked about certifications and awards. Those are nice things. We live in a Google world, so Google reviews can often be very helpful. And if you're one of our clients, please go leave us a Google review, right? But I think that also let's talk about process, right? Because you talked about people coming in and an MSP doing the front end work, right? Evaluating the setup and learning more about business goals. But what else in the process is important, right? You want to understand things like pricing, onboarding, offboarding, how experienced are they in managing the change process? Because again, change is hard. And it's a little fragile, right? Because if you're talking about changing over security tools and all, there's a little bit of a timeline involved and and not extreme risk, but I think that's one of the fears we talked about. Is there going to be disruption? Is we're going to lose data? Those sorts of things. So as we approach these sort of change scenarios, what are the things that we're doing to try to ensure that, whatever those fears might be, that we're de-escalating those?
Yeah. In 23, years, we've had a lot of different types of onboardings, I'll say. With offboarding a previous provider, you always want to be honest with them unless there's some kind of concern that they're going to withhold credentials or something like that. But we do like to have some overlap with the previous provider so that we can make sure it's a smooth transition. So we always will try to do that. And that helps so much in just making the entire process minimally disruptive. Obviously, there are cases where that's not feasible or
maybe where
possible.
the other provider doesn't play nice.
Exactly. Which we've dealt with that before too. So it's not like we can't do that,
Sure.
but just be aware that it may be a little more disruptive if that's the case. If you are in that situation, I would say run as fast as you can away from that type of provider. But really, the onboarding and offboarding process, just communicate openly with everyone involved and it will go pretty smoothly.
Sure. I think we have to address, obviously if potential clients are thinking about changing providers, we're looking at them as well. It's a relationship. So it's a two-way sort of experience, right? So understanding what you know about our core values and the way that we prefer to operate, what are some of the things that we look for in clients?
Yeah. I would say we look for clients that are willing to take guidance, that we can have a good relationship with, that they trust in us to actually make the right recommendations for their business.
You want them to buy in and be responsive and active in the process.
Like you mentioned, it's not, it's not just okay, everything's working fine, we're just going to keep doing what we're doing and ignore each other. We really want to help support businesses and grow the businesses that we're providing the IT services for.
Sure.
So looking for ownership buy-in with that is really important. If ownership isn't on board, they've delegated it to somebody else, then it's probably not going to be a great relationship if we even get that deal in the first place. So
yeah, again, having done this a number of times, what are the things that tend to be, like we talked about red flags, like green flags for you in that process, right? We talked about ownership and buy-in and engagement and investment and all those sorts of things, but is there ever a moment where you're like, oh, this is going to be a good one, this is going to be a great partnership?
That's kind of just as you're going through the process, if you have good rapport with them and they are willing to give you the answers to the questions you ask.
Sure.
Some people kind of want to keep everything real close to the chest, which that's always concerning because immediately it's like, well, there's something here that you're distrustful about.
Oh, your spidey sense is tingling.
Yeah. And you're not sure why.
But maybe theirs is, again,
Sure.
if we talk about this being a relationship, people have baggage, right?
Yeah.
We've talked to people who have described, almost being held hostage by their MSP or whatever else. So there can be that distrust.
Sure.
And so I think you have to recognize that.
Oh, absolutely.
But I was just curious, if you're like, oh, okay. Because you think about, I don't know, in meeting with different people in our team, they've described people that get it, right? That understand some of the things that we talked about, I think, in terms of, how IT can be a profit driver and those sorts of things. Yep. So I didn't know if there was anything that you can connect between really our most successful clients and that, first onboarding meeting where oh yeah, they get it.
Yeah. I would say that they want to invest in their IT because they do realize how important it is to their business. Yeah. And we understand too that IT is not the business of the businesses we're supporting. There's a lot of businesses there, but that's not their main focus. But if they understand that investing in it will help their business ultimately, that's always a great fit client.
Yeah, I think that's true because, you'll get into some situations where companies will have an internal IT person or someone who's basically been tasked with it because it fell to them, and they're invested in it, right? They're invested in the success of the organization and the technology. But I think that partnership bridge, right, and connecting our expertise with theirs, because we support companies across really a broad range of industries, right? Manufacturing and healthcare and agriculture and all these different things. But they're all experts in that.
Yeah.
So how could you be it must be difficult to be oh, well, I'm an agri-scientist and also an IT person, right? And so it's kind of just aligning vision with operational capacity, right? So Yeah. What do you think is something that people miss in the process, right? If they're evaluating a new partner, sitting down with them, and trying to, and I mean on the client side, because obviously people shop, right? There are a lot of IT providers out there. It's a saturated industry. But what's something that, you're like, I need to make sure they understand this, because I don't want them to miss it.
Yeah. I think the most important thing that people aren't evaluating is the roadmap that, as you're searching, providers should be coming up with a roadmap for you to some extent. And if they provide a roadmap, well, one, if they don't provide a roadmap at all, that's probably something that's a good sign that they are not really invested in your growth. But two, if they provide a roadmap and you don't feel like it's aligned with what your vision is, then they probably didn't ask you the right questions during the discovery, and they probably aren't paying attention to what you brought to them, to the different issues you brought to them. So I would say that's something that's missed a lot. I think it's important that everybody is getting aligned on that.
Yeah.
So if that's not happening, red flag.
Yeah,
Red
I
flag
feel like you're
people.
reading off my page because the word alignment is right
cheating,
here.
I'm
Are
looking
you?
over your
Oh, are you?
shoulder.
Okay. Because like the idea, we talked about price to kind of open this section. I think it's really easy to shop on price, but you can pay less for someone who's not paying attention, for someone who's not investing, someone who's not providing that roadmap, for instance. And at the end of the day, maybe not. If you're going to change, if you're going to go through that hassle, of finding a new provider and making that change and that switch, if you're just doing it based on, well, this person's cheaper, and I get it, like, the
Budget
economy,
is always a
and there are other
concern,
factors
sure.
involved, and pricing is important. I'm not going to pretend that it's not, but if you're just purely going after, like, we need to pay less, again, like the way that we view it, IT can be an ROI multiplier, right? If done really well. And that's the kind of investment we want to put into it. But again, for that fit and that alignment and that, sort of get it moment, the clients have to come in with that as well.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. And I think it's important for clients to think about too, do they provide the cheapest service? Are they the cheapest option out there? Do you want to be the cheapest option out there? And if you don't, then do you want your IT to be the cheapest option too?
That's really interesting. I had never, that's so just to revisit that, you're like, do you want to be, and some people do, right? They're value leader, that sort of thing. Like, we'll do it cheaper than anybody else, but like, it's really tough to, to scale a business unless you're like the only person who, does it, but then you don't need to be the cheapest, right? And so that's really interesting. I like that thought. All right, let's talk about the transition itself. Right? How to leave without breaking everything, right? Because again, we talked about the fear and the anxiety, and if they decided they want to change and they decided they've walked through the process of evaluating a provider correctly, what gets overlooked in the chaos of transition, right? Obviously, if they're in a contract or if their contract is ending, contracts can be a little messy, right? So what are some things there?
Yeah. Just like a horror story, I guess. We, like you mentioned with the contracts, we did have somebody sign a contract with us and then not realize that their contract had already auto-renewed for another 3 years. So check your contract before you really get too far into the process. Make sure that you can actually get out of it or it's coming up on its end date, because there might be some wording in there about how much advance notice you need to give to get out of your
potential
contract.
penalties that go with not doing that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So
which in some cases might be preferable, right?
Yeah.
If you're like, I'm done with you. Like again,
I will pay what I can to get out of it. Yeah, that could be the case. But another big thing that we've seen recently is people have hardware in their office, in their business, that they don't actually own. The MSP owns it. So that's another thing that's important to check. Make sure you know who owns your hardware. Make sure that you request credentials for if you have a server or for admin access to different things. Because you don't want to realize, oh, I need to now contact my previous provider after I've already left. There's going to be maybe some of that we can help with, but when it comes to certain things, they're only going to give that to you
Yeah.
versus us if we're coming in.
That's great. I mean, obviously people are thinking about passwords and logins and all that kind of thing, but the hardware is, something that could probably be overlooked.
Yeah, and then that's going to end up being another expense too,
Sure.
because you have to replace it at that point. We're not really in the business of hardware as a service, so we don't like rent out equipment, but some providers do, and
Sure.
if that's the case, it'll have to get replaced.
Yeah. Now, in terms of like leaving and you're making that transition, you're in the moment. I think it's also important, to communicate well. We talked about that earlier. But if we're going to go back to our relationship sort of analogy here, and I feel like this whole podcast, maybe like we went with this pregnancy idea, like what to expect, because it was a
Should have been
clever thing.
relationships
Maybe it should have been
instead.
relationships. Now that we've like really started hammering it out here, but like sometimes in relationships, and I actually just had a conversation with my son a couple nights ago because he's 13 and starting to
Fun.
dip his toe into the dating pool, and it was like, well, you got to understand, in every relationship, you're learning, right? You're learning your non-negotiables. You're learning, your what's the opposite of a non-negotiable?
Negotiable.
A negotiable?
A negotiable.
I guess, yeah. But like, if a non-negotiable is something you absolutely won't tolerate, what is something you absolutely have to have? Oh, like a
Necessities.
A necessity, yeah. So, thank you. So like, you understand your non-negotiables and your necessities. The same can be true in an IT relationship, right? Because if you're like, look, this is what went bad in the last one, and this is what we have to have go right in this one. And so I think that having that transparent kind of communication, just to level set expectations, right? Because life, I think broadly, this is going to get real philosophical for a moment.
Okay.
I think life is about managing expectations,
Sure.
right? And so as you think about IT or dating relationships or literally anything else in your life, you're trying to manage expectations, and like the best way to do that is to be open and honest about what those are and communicate those so that you're not like, you talk about people keeping things close to their chest, sort of, it's like, well, if something went bad and there's baggage here, it's really helpful if we know, what that is.
We don't want to do the same thing.
Right,
again.
100%,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Because that could be, standard or whatever else, just the way that things are handled or processed or whatever else. And so we just don't want to repeat other people's mistakes, not knowing about them, I think is a big thing.
And also we want to be honest with people too. If something is industry standard, but it doesn't work for their business, we want to help educate them a little bit, but also if that doesn't work for their business and we can't do anything differently, then we don't want to go into the relationship with unrealistic expectations, right?
Perfect. Now, without getting too technical, because neither of us are decidedly technical people, I want to talk about like the data, the backups, the sensitive information that would have to change hands in the process. Do you have any insights like related to that in terms of how people can prepare? Because again, like you got to plan ahead here, right? You want to make sure that you understand your notification dates if you're leaving a partner, so that you're figuring out timelines. But also in terms of like the essentials to keep your business up and running, do you have any insights around backups and just data protection there?
I'm not, like you said, I'm not going to get really technical. I'm going to phone a friend and call in Keith, I think, for that one. But it goes back to the communication.
Sure.
Make sure that you are letting your provider, the provider you're leaving, know what's going to be happening, when it's going to be happening, and then communicating that with your new provider as well so that they can coordinate and make sure there's no gaps in the timeline of when backups are getting done.
Because we don't want that either, right?
Yeah.
It's a real bad look and a tough start to like sprint out of the gate and stumble, right? Because like, again, if you're going to get into a new relationship, we definitely went wrong. It should have been relationships.
Definitely.
But
You
if
want
you're
to
gonna,
look your best.
yeah, for sure. You want to start off and make a great first impression. But if you're sort of being limited or restricted in some way by the other provider because they didn't have adequate notice, or we weren't aware of everything that was needed, you just want to make sure that you've got all the information. And so our process has a lot of that baked in. But it depends on that clarity and that transparency of communication.
Yeah.
So now we've talked through all of that, and it's time to notify your current provider, right? So as Jessica said earlier, look through the contract details, understand the timelines, but you're going to write, a formal notice, with an expected date of transition, any other sensitive or pertinent details. What else in there?
That's the main thing, is let them know when it's going to be. Let them know what you need from them as well. It always helps too if you are giving contact information for your new provider. So you can do kind of an introduction, if you will, and let them know, hey, this is who everything's going to be going to. Ideally, your new provider has one point of contact so that it's not kind of chaos of who do I talk to here. So I would include that just as a recap, date that you want to actually be done, and then the new provider's information.
Sure. Obviously a smooth switch, as I was kind of trying to indicate, starts well before the offboarding, onboarding moment, with that clarity, with the, proper procedural handling of the contract. But this is where you get to get really real, right? Where have you seen this go really bad, right? You talked about, the renewal a moment ago, someone not realizing that their contract had renewed, so really paying attention to contract reviews and things like that. But do you have any other horror stories around?
Yeah, that one was probably the worst because that just stunk because we thought we had a new client and then all of a sudden you don't.
And let's be real, we celebrate around here, right? Like we're ringing bells.
So we had to kind of tuck tail and be like, oh, never mind everybody, sorry about that. That was definitely the worst, but another kind of recent one was where they let the previous provider know very last minute, like the day before. And there were some other issues surrounding that they absolutely, that they kind of needed to wait until last minute because the provider was doing some more work for them last minute as well. And so that was kind of a tricky one. Things weren't necessarily as smooth as they normally would have been if they had already gave the notice early. So they didn't really have credentials that they needed because they hadn't given the notice in time, and then somebody was on vacation. And so just the communication and making sure that everybody knows what's going on as early as possible.
Well, here's the part where we get to try to tie things together. So what's actually riskier? Switching providers and not being prepared, or taking too long to switch?
Probably taking too long to switch because, like we talked about earlier, there's that tech debt that's building up. There's also that frustration that's building up that leads to more baggage that it's going to be harder to go into a new relationship.
And it's it's just like efficiency. So there's potential loss of clients or like whatever else. So if your technology isn't working in the way that you want it to, there's a cost associated to that, right? And you can think about, we need to get somebody in here to do this cheaper. But again, cheaper isn't always the answer if you're already on a cheap plan and you're just trying to find another cheap provider who will do better. Like you get what you pay for in a certain sense, right? So something to keep in mind there. What do businesses typically underestimate in the process of switching, right? Because where I want to get to, just to sort of lead the way, you want to, we talked about baggage and all this kind of stuff. You want to rebuild trust, right? So as you've heard from clients who've gone through our onboarding process, what are the things that maybe they're surprised by, that they underestimated? And there could be a number of answers here, but I'm curious if you.
I think during onboarding, people don't realize how much we're going to communicate with them during the first 90 days. Ideally, it's a good thing that we're communicating with them that much, but
unless the thing was they talk to us too much, which I don't think we've ever heard, right?
We have heard that before, not often. I want to say that's only maybe been with a couple people, but there's a lot of communication during that first 90 days just to make sure that we're getting everything exactly how it needs to be. So I think that's something that people probably underestimate or don't expect with onboarding, is just a lot of communication. But you can always tell us to back off too if we get
but we just want to make sure you're aware, right? Hey, this is what's happening. This is where we are. This is what's this is where we're at in the process. Because again, if you're gonna start a new relationship, gosh darn it, we did it wrong. We did it so wrong. I'm so sorry. I gotta figure out a way now to get back to it, right? To really make it make sense. But if you're gonna go through that process, ideally you're going to just keep them really informed, right? To eliminate, fear or anxiety around, anything related to the change.
Yeah, with any good relationship, open and honest communication.
For sure.
Philosophical.
So beyond, I love it, beyond just the communication side of things, what should businesses expect in the first few weeks of onboarding with a company like Accent?
Yeah, with us, we're going to do a lot of the base level stuff initially. We have what we call an external kickoff meeting where we come on site, bring a few techs with us that kind of lead onboarding, and do all the on-site work that we need to do, also make introductions, get to meet people, let them know who we are and that they can contact us now. And then we do a lot of work in the background to continue making sure everything is where it needs to be. But they're also going to be meeting with you on a regular basis. So checking in weekly to make sure everything's going smoothly. Does that answer your question? I feel like I could go a lot of...
For sure. So what I had written down here was just what an effective onboarding plan typically looks like, right? So you're looking at detailed handover, documentation, backup restorations. I mean, it's technical and probably kind of boring.
That we kind of do in the background because people don't necessarily care or want to know. They just want to know it works. Sure. But really, we're monitoring that relationship heavily that first.
And for those local clients who are nearby, walking in the door, meeting people, shaking hands, that's one thing. But I think that in any instance, if people are nearby or not, you need to have that point person, right? And so maybe that's an insight that you can add. There can be too many cooks in the kitchen. For sure. And so, really understanding who's leading it on their end so that there aren't, because the more people you have to get a message to, or the more people who have to make decisions, it can be difficult. So maybe, a piece of insight from our side is, really think about who's going to be that go-to person, when things need to get done or decisions need to be made or notices need to be sent, right? And I think that, we've kind of touched on this a little bit, but some of the common roadblocks in this process, right? It could be documentation, it could be handover type stuff. Anything else?
I mean, most of the time people don't have great documentation. So we are trying to figure things out when we come into a new environment. And that's just part of it. We expect that. So we've gotten good at doing that. But that's probably a big roadblock for us, just coming in and figuring it out. Sure. The handoff stuff, typically MSP, other providers are cooperative, I'll say. It's a rare occasion where they're not. So I would say the biggest thing is just not having great documentation initially and having to build that out.
Sure. Now, let's say, again, just to kind of go back from where we came through this, podcast or, this session today, we've talked about, what would cause someone to want to make a change, what they should consider, in the process of finding a new provider. We talked through sort of that early stage onboarding once they've made a decision. But I'm curious, how would clients measure early success, right? Because we've talked about ROI, we've talked about how, IT can make a difference in your business, but what are some milestones or some toll gates, checkpoints that people could look at and go, we're on the right track?
Yeah. I think paying attention to what your response times have been like in the past and what they are now, that's always a big one. But also looking at how they're communicating with you about stuff. Are they communicating effectively with you and letting you know where the process is? Also, are they starting to dig into some of those recurring issues that you were seeing with the other provider and figure out why those are actually issues? Do they even try to do that? That's something that you can also measure success by.
I think something for us too, we have all of our internal dashboards and metrics around, how quickly we're resolving tickets and then how many and all those sorts of things. But something that goes out really in all of our ticket sort of closures is, our customer satisfaction scores, net promoter scores, those sorts of things. But I think that sort of underlines an important part of it, because, while ultimately a business leader, a CEO, an owner, a CFO, whatever, they'll be the ones, putting their name on the line, signing up for this new service. We support companies that are small, 10 users, up to companies that are, hundreds. And I think that you generally want to feel the sense, that your team feels supported. And so I think a lot of our we love a good testimonial from a CEO or whatever else. But I think some of the things that really get our techs most excited are when just your average end users are reporting back about great service. And obviously it makes us look good, but that's, you want to be top to bottom. Because at the end of the day, the way that, a CEO in one company might use their technology is going to be wildly different than someone who's, an accountant,
Are your employees happier
right.
with the new provider?
Yeah. And so I think it can be an important thing for leaders, in the early stages of transition, just to make sure, hey, does everyone feel supported? Because we're doing our best, but that could be, whether it's us or somebody else, trying to make sure that is a fundamental part of it, that everyone feels like, hey, we're in the right direction now, right? Because if you've gone through the process to make a switch, clearly there was a reason for that. So we want to make sure we're sort of rectifying some of those issues. What to you, and I realize that you're very front end, and you are you participate in sort of the onboarding meeting, but what do you think signals that where trust has been broken or lost from a previous provider? What is it do you think signals that it's being restored?
Yeah, that Mark probably has a better answer for that.
That's our partner success manager, who is sort of the front end.
Yeah, he really does ongoing meetings, that kind of thing. But I think the feedback I will get in onboarding meetings where they already feel like we're more professional and we are thinking through things more so than the other provider was or had been. That's always the feedback that I get that's signaling that it's already an improvement. Sometimes with the baggage, people coming in with the baggage, they are asking a lot of questions about how things are going to be done. And that's fine. I welcome those questions because I can answer those questions, but people, they want to know because they are scared. Sure. They're worried. They're concerned.
Okay, I figured out how to do it. How to get back
to
our original theme. Yeah. All right. So when my wife and I were getting ready to have kids, I went to all the new parent classes, right? All of them.
Okay.
Because I was an only child. I grew up an only child. And I had never really been around babies. So you're talking about fear and, uncertainty. I had all of that.
You wanted all the knowledge.
I did. And so I would ask questions constantly. I think the instructor was kind of annoyed because I was asking so many questions. But I was also annoyed because every time I would ask a question, the instructor would say, well, it kind of depends. And I was like, just give me a straight answer. I need to know, is this going to happen or is it not? And I think the same is kind of true here where, if someone's expecting a change, things are going to kind of depend. Every environment is different. Every set of expectations is different. And so, being able to navigate that process with expertise, kind of that's where we come in and are able to add value. But as you think about, that onboarding and where we're able to help, rebuild that trust, sometimes it's going to depend a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Sure. And it again goes back to communication.
Sure, absolutely.
If the client is willing to be very open and honest about what they're looking for and what they would like to see, then we can also be very open and honest about how we can provide it or if we can provide it. But yeah, it depends.
But do you know what doesn't communicate well? Babies.
Yeah.
They're either happy or sad.
Hey, IT providers are so much easier than babies, for sure. So
excellent. All right. Well, let's talk about, so we've gone through this journey. They've made the switch. They're onboarded. I want to talk about now a future reality, right? Because if you're in this moment now where you're frustrated and, issues have piled up and you're kind of approaching the moment where, it's we got to make a change. I think you can be inspired by the idea of what it could be like after. Mm-hmm. That's not going to necessarily be right out of the gate. We're going to make some progress, but change is hard, as we talked about. So, I want to talk about what the relationship should feel like, once you're up and running, right? And sort of the difference that we bring in. So, you're in sales, even though your title is different. And so as we talked about at the very beginning, but like, what are some of the things that we offer clients to really make sure that we're aligned, that we are progressing on those goals, and that ultimately, we're doing our very best to make sure that we're not going to have a breakup. God, I went back. I did it. It's my fault.
You had course corrected.
I was close.
Now we're back to relationships.
Right. Yeah.
Well, I think something that's so important that we do, and I have been involved in a few of them, are IT business reviews, where we're actually planning strategically for your business, and how IT can help support your business and help it grow. That's so important, because again, you don't want to treat it like a utility where it works, it's fine. You want to actually think about it as, how can it help me grow?
Right.
How can I be strategic about where I put my money, where I invest it for IT? Should you be thinking about IT every single day? No, that's not your business. That's our business. We're thinking about it for you. But we do want you to think about it sometimes. And so that's why those ITBRs IT business reviews are so important. So.
Perfect. But we're looking at things in there about what's happening in your environment, how we're progressing together on your goals, those sorts of things. And so again, when you talked earlier in the session today about, how it feels different, that's one of those things, right? That's how we try to stay aligned and make sure that, our goals align with yours, and that we're, mutually progressing toward, whatever that may be. Because I think that there's a difference, right, between like a vendor and a partner. And, as we've gone through different initiatives to try to drive testimonials and reviews and things like that, that's a consistent theme that we hear. It doesn't just feel like a vendor. It feels like a partner. I think that's a big difference from how a lot of, garden variety IT shops operate. So, I'm curious, how does this impact the business leaders, right? The people that you're talking to are coming and going, look, we got to figure this out. It's not working. If we do our job well and we communicate and everybody's, on board, how does this make life better?
Yeah. Instead of worrying about the next thing that's going to break, which is what a lot of people do when they don't have a great provider, they're thinking about, what's the next thing I can do? They're being strategic with their IT, and we're helping them think through those things, because all the basic stuff, all the day-to-day stuff is already taken care of. So that's something that I think helps or is different, right, I guess, about us.
Yeah, it's interesting because like we talked about how IT is fundamental and integrated across so many different layers of business, but like you should be focused on growing your business, and we should be a part of that because, most companies don't have, the IT consulting and the IT leadership to be able to, marry those things. So like you said, like you should be not focused on this. Right?
Yeah.
You should be focused on,
why are you thinking about how old your server is as the business owner? That shouldn't be your concern.
Right.
That's somebody else.
And for some it's not, right?
Yeah,
Tech graveyards and things like that. But
some people don't want to, they put it off.
Yeah.
But it's always in the back of their head and they're thinking about it. And really, you don't want that either. So how are you being strategic with that?
Yeah. Well, we're now at the wrap up part of today's podcast. So if you could give one piece of advice to a company wondering whether or not it's time to switch partners, what would it be?
I would say if you're wondering, it's probably at least time to start looking. If you are completely thrilled with your provider, then no, don't look. But if you have those questions and you have those concerns, do some exploring.
Yeah. What's one thing you think businesses should stop tolerating?
Consistent issues, the same consistent issues. That shouldn't be. Can you
name names on what kind of issues?
Names.
Yeah,
I don't think I'm allowed to.
No, not name names on the clients. I'm saying name names on what are those issues. Right.
Hey, I keep having to restart my Outlook every day, or I have to restart my computer to get this program to work. Stuff like that. It's such a small, tiny thing that could be investigated and could be fixed.
Sure.
And if you're having to keep doing that, or you're doing these weird workarounds and wasting a bunch of time on that, then they're not actually being proactive about stuff.
Yeah. What's a potentially uncomfortable truth that business leaders need to hear?
An uncomfortable truth.
Or it could just be a truth. Like if they're thinking about making a change, what's something that like...
I think it goes back to the price thing that we talked about, where just you can't compare apples to apples.
Yeah.
If you're not happy with the service you have now, why would you want the exact same service somewhere else?
Or why would you expect, I don't know, like if you're bargain basement pricing, right, and you're not getting good service, like, do you think that that's...
It's not going to be better if you have, or you go to another provider and you're paying the same amount, or you're paying less.
And maybe it will initially, but I mean, over the long term, again, like that's the risk.
Fix any issues.
For sure.
Yeah.
All right. So we've walked through all of this. We've recognized the signs. We've gained some clarity on what's missing and when it might be time to evaluate a fit. We've tried to help people prepare for the transition, the onboarding, and then generate some ideas on what that future reality of blissful IT integration might look like. And I'm really struggling to get back to our original theme. I've got nothing here.
So when you're expecting a new IT provider, I would say that the open and honest communication is going to be the biggest, most important part of that. And you can't communicate with babies, so you really blew it on the title.
Yeah, sorry,
I
did. I think though that okay, maybe I can do it. But with any sort of new life, there's excitement, but there's also fear and anxiety. And so if you're expecting a change in the life of your, I don't know, I'm stretching it so hard right now. It's not
the
great.
Life of your IT.
I just want to apologize to all of you. We should have seen this, but we didn't. So here's the deal. If you're evaluating IT providers or wondering whether or not it's time to switch, we want to point you to our website. We have developed some content there, 7 easy steps on how to change providers without disruption. I'd love to have you check that out. We also, if you're sort of in that mid stage, we also have a resource called our 21 questions to ask any IT provider. It's a really long title. That's the shortened version of it. It's longer than that. But it can be a valuable resource so that if you're thinking about, okay, what are the things that I need to know that they need to know? It can be a helpful sort of tool, so you don't have to come up with it by yourself, and you can get a little bit more detailed insight before you go there.
Yeah. I would also add that if you have other questions that those resources don't answer, give us a call. I'm happy to talk to you and talk through things with you.
Yeah, and not force any thematic missteps. Yeah. That aside, this was your first podcast.
Ever in my life.
In your life.
Yeah.
You're a natural.
Yeah.
Unbelievable.
How do you... TikToker, that's why.
Oh, you're a TikToker. Sorry. This is long form TikTok.
Yeah, exactly.
But how'd you feel about it?
Survived it.
Yeah?
Yeah.
I think you thrived.
I think I answered most of the questions.
Yeah, you did great.
Right.
You did great. I appreciate it. All right, Jessica, thank you so much. Again, we're Accent Consulting. This is the Accent Consulting Show. Thanks for following along, and we'll see you in our next episode.